My cousin Melanie looked absolutely radiant in her Vera Wang gown, all champagne, silk, and borrowed diamonds and 26-year-old optimism that nothing could ever go wrong. I watched from my assigned seat at table 12, the family overflow section, tucked near the kitchen entrance, where the catering staff rushed past with trays of champagne. I couldn't afford to drink even if I wanted to. The glass terrace at Hudson Yards was everything a wedding venue should be. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline, crystal installations that caught the light like captured stars, marble floors polished to a mirror shine. The kind of place that whispered old money and new beginnings, where even the air smelled expensive. I'd left Sophie with Mrs. Rodriguez 3 hours ago, my 3-year-old daughter's disappointed face still fresh in my mind like a wound I couldn't stop touching. She'd wanted to come, wanted to wear the purple dress with the dinosaur on the pocket that she'd picked out herself, wanted to see Cousin Melly look like a princess. But Mrs. Rodriguez, my 68-year-old neighbor and accidental lifeline, had convinced me otherwise. Formal weddings and toddlers didn't mix well, especially when the toddler's mother was already the family cautionary tale. Better to keep Sophie home where she could watch Encanto for the 100th time and avoid the scrutiny that would inevitably fall on both of us. The scrutiny had started the moment I'd walked through the doors at 6:47 p.m., alone, 29 years old, single mother, wearing an emerald green dress I'd bought on clearance 2 years ago that still looked decent if you didn't examine the hem too closely or notice that I'd had to safety pin the zipper. My cousin Jennifer had swept past me in the receiving line, her designer maternity gown showing off a 5-month pregnancy she wore like a crown. Her husband, not my ex-husband, thankfully, because that particular humiliation belonged to a different cousin, had given me a smile that managed to be both pitying and dismissive. And then there was David. David Winfrey, the man who'd walked out when Sophie was 6 months old, who'd left me with $40,000 in debt from his investment opportunities, and a daughter who sometimes asked why she didn't have a daddy like the other kids at daycare. David, who was here as a +1 to his new girlfriend, a 25-year-old marketing executive with perfect hair and a trust fund that meant she'd never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. He stood across the ballroom now, laughing at something someone said, looking like he'd never made the biggest mistake of his life. Meanwhile, I worked retail at a bridal boutique in the Upper East Side. The irony wasn't lost on me and came home to an apartment in Sunset Park that the real estate listing had optimistically described as cozy and up-and-coming. "Kate, darling, you came alone?" My Aunt Diane's voice carried that particular tone that managed to sound concerned and disappointed simultaneously, like she'd perfected the art of the backhanded greeting. She'd appeared at my table during cocktail hour, my Uncle Richard trailing behind her with the same uncomfortable expression he always wore when forced to acknowledge his niece's failures. "We'd hoped you might bring someone," Aunt Diane continued, settling into the empty chair beside me without invitation. "There are several eligible men here from the Castellano family. You remember them, don't you? They have those import businesses. Very successful." "I'm fine, Aunt Diane." I'd forced a smile I didn't feel, the muscles in my face protesting the effort. "Sophie sends her love to Melanie." "Oh, yes, the baby." My aunt's use of the word baby for my 3-year-old daughter spoke volumes. "Mrs. Rodriguez is watching her, I assume? Such a shame you can't afford a proper nanny. Children really do benefit from professional childcare." They'd moved on before I could respond, circulating among guests who actually mattered, family who'd made something of themselves. My older brother Ryan and his fiancée, both with graduate degrees and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Cousins with stock portfolios and country club memberships and lives that looked like the before pictures in magazines, where mine was definitely the after. And then there was me, the former event planner who'd once had her own business, who'd once been the family success story, until I'd gotten pregnant and David had left and everything I'd built had collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Now I folded cashmere sweaters for women who spent more on a single shopping trip than I made in a month, and tried not to calculate how many extra shifts I'd need to cover next month's rent increase. Dinner had been interminable. 7 courses of food I barely tasted while conversations swirled around me like water around a stone. The couple to my left discussed their villa in Tuscany. The woman across from me showed off an engagement ring that probably cost more than I'd make in 2 years. I smiled and nodded, and wondered if anyone would notice if I left early, if I could just disappear into the Manhattan night and pretend this evening had never happened. Then came the dancing. The DJ announced the couple's first dance, and Melanie floated across the floor in her new husband's arms, backlit by the city lights, looking like something out of a movie. My parents danced next, looking every bit the proud family, Ryan and his fiancée joined them, moving together with the easy grace of people who'd never known real struggle. Even my younger cousins paired off, laughing and spinning under lights that cast everything in soft romantic focus. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, I noticed clouds gathering over Manhattan's skyline. The weather forecast had promised clear skies all weekend, but nature clearly had other plans. Thunder rumbled in the distance, barely audible over the music. Within minutes, rain began streaming down the glass in sheets, turning the city lights into abstract streaks of color, like the world itself was crying. "Kate." David's voice behind me made every muscle in my body tense. I turned slowly, deliberately, to find him standing there alone, his girlfriend presumably taking a bathroom break or holding court somewhere with her gaggle of admirers. "No, thank you," I said, before he could finish whatever he'd started to say. "Come on, Kate, for old time's sake." He was using that boyish charm that had worked on me once upon a time, before I'd realized charm was all he had to offer, before I'd learned the difference between a man who made promises and a man who kept them. "We can be adults about this." "We are being adults," I replied, keeping my voice level, professional, the same tone I used with difficult customers at the boutique. "I'm declining your invitation." I turned back toward the dance floor, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. He didn't. "You know, it doesn't have to be like this between us," David said, moving closer. "I know I made mistakes, but—" "David." I stood, suddenly exhausted by the entire charade, by this man who'd abandoned me and our daughter but still thought he had the right to my time, my attention, my forgiveness. "Go back to your girlfriend. Dance with her. Leave me alone." His expression shifted then, the charm sliding away to reveal something colder underneath. "You could have had everything, Kate, but you chose to keep the baby. You chose this life." The words landed like a physical blow. I should have slapped him, should have caused a scene, should have done anything other than stand there while he walked away, rejoining his girlfriend who'd appeared at the edge of the dance floor like she'd been summoned. She looked at me across the room, her hand finding David's, and smiled. A victor's smile. The music shifted to something slower, more romantic. Couples filled the floor, swaying together while the storm outside matched the one building in my chest. I sank back into my chair at table 12 and tried very hard not to cry in front of 200 people who already pitied me. That's when I noticed him. He stood near the bar, apart from the crowd but somehow commanding attention anyway. Tall, maybe 6'2" or 3", with dark hair, swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. His suit was charcoal gray and perfectly tailored, the kind of quality you didn't find in department stores, the kind that whispered money so old it didn't need to shout. But it was his eyes that held my attention. Even from across the ballroom, even through the soft lighting and the crowd, I could feel the weight of his gaze. He was watching me. Not subtly, not with the passing curiosity of a stranger at a wedding. He was studying me with an intensity that should have made me uncomfortable but instead sent a completely different kind of shiver down my spine. I looked away first, heat rising in my cheeks like I was 23 instead of 29, like I hadn't learned years ago that men who looked like that didn't look at women like me. When I glanced back, he was speaking with someone from the groom's family, one of the Castellanos. I thought, the ones Aunt Diane had mentioned. They exchanged a few words, and then the stranger began moving through the crowd. Toward me. My first instinct was to run. To grab my clutch and make some excuse about checking on Sophie, about an emergency at home, about anything that would get me out of this ballroom and away from whatever was about to happen. But something kept me frozen in my seat at table 12 while he crossed the floor with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life, who'd never had a door closed in his face or been made to feel small. He stopped at my table. Up close, he was even more devastating. Those eyes I'd noticed from across the room were light brown, almost amber in the chandelier light, framed by dark lashes that should have looked feminine but somehow made him more masculine instead. A thin scar marked his jaw on the right side, barely visible but adding an edge of danger to features that were otherwise almost too perfect. He smelled expensive cedar and something darker I couldn't name, something that made me want to lean closer even as my brain screamed at me to be careful. "You've been sitting here all evening looking like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, his voice carrying a faint Italian accent that made me think of old movies and villas on the Mediterranean. "That seems like a tragedy." "I'm fine," I managed, though my pulse had picked up speed and my hands felt suddenly clumsy around my champagne flute. "Thank you for your concern. I don't think you are fine." He pulled out the chair beside me without asking permission and sat down, the movement fluid and practiced, like he'd been taking up space in rooms full of strangers his entire life. I think you're miserable and trying very hard not to show it. The observation was so accurate it stole my breath. You don't know anything about me. I know you came alone to a family wedding where everyone else is paired off. I know that man who approached you earlier said something that made you want to disappear. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I know you've been checking your phone every 15 minutes worried about your daughter, not looking for an escape route, though you want one. Am I wrong? I set my phone down, suddenly aware of how transparent I must be, how easy to read. That's very observant of you. Are you a friend of the bride or groom? Neither. Business associate of the Castellanos. He gestured toward the family I'd seen him speaking with earlier. They invited me. He extended his hand. Adolfo Trevisani. I took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against mine, the confidence in his grip that somehow managed to be firm without being aggressive. Kate Winfrey. Kate. He said my name like he was tasting it, turning it over in his mouth. The bride's cousin, the one who came alone. Word travels fast. In certain circles, everything travels fast. He released my hand but didn't move away, didn't reclaim the socially appropriate distance that strangers were supposed to maintain. I have a proposition for you, Kate Winfrey. This should have been where I made my excuses and left, where I remembered I was a single mother with responsibilities and bills and absolutely no room in my life for mysterious strangers with expensive suits and dangerous eyes. Instead, I heard myself say, "What kind of proposition?" Adolfo leaned closer, his voice dropping low enough that only I could hear over the music, over the laughter and conversation that filled the ballroom like white noise. Dance with me. Spend the rest of this evening pretending to be mine. Let everyone here see that you're not alone, not pitied, not forgotten. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. You want me to pretend to be, what? Your girlfriend? Your date? To a complete stranger? Why not? His expression remained neutral, but something flickered in those amber eyes, something that might have been amusement, or might have been something darker. It solves both our problems. My family is relentless about wanting me to settle down, to bring someone to these events. Your family clearly enjoys reminding you that you're single. We could help each other. That's insane. Perhaps. He stood, offering his hand again, and I noticed for the first time how large his hands were, how they looked like they could break things without effort. But the next song is starting, and your ex-husband is watching us from across the room with a very interesting expression on his face. So what do you say, Kate? Will you dance with me and let everyone think you belong to someone who actually appreciates you? The smart answer was no. The responsible answer was no. The safe answer was definitely, absolutely, without question, no. I took his hand and stood. One dance, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. That's all. His smile was devastating. We'll see about that. Adolfo led me onto the dance floor with the kind of confidence that made people step aside without realizing they were doing it. His hand settled at the small of my back, warm through the thin fabric of my dress, while his other hand clasped mine with surprising gentleness for someone built like he could break things without trying. The orchestra began playing "The Way You Look Tonight," and we moved together with an ease that shouldn't have been possible between strangers. He led like someone who'd been doing this his entire life, each step precise, effortless, natural. How do you know my name? I asked, because it had been bothering me since he'd said it, the way it had rolled off his tongue like he'd been saying it for years. I make it my business to know things. His amber eyes met mine, unflinching. You're the bride's cousin. Former event planner, quite successful, from what I understand. Single mother to a 3-year-old daughter named Sophie. You've been checking your phone every 10 minutes, worried about her, not looking for an escape route, though you desperately want one. The accuracy of his observations should have frightened me. Instead, I felt something else entirely seen. Actually, truly seen. Maybe for the first time in 2 years. That's unsettling, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Is it? Or is it refreshing that someone's been paying attention? His thumb traced a small circle on my hand, the gesture somehow both innocent and intimate. I need a companion for the evening. You need to stop looking like the family tragedy. We help each other. It's simple. Nothing about this is simple, but even as I said it, I glanced across the room. David was watching us, his girlfriend forgotten beside him, his expression a mixture of confusion and something that looked dangerously like jealousy. Aunt Diane had stopped mid-conversation, her mouth slightly open. Cousin Jennifer looked like she'd just witnessed a miracle or a scandal. What's the worst that could happen? Adolfo asked, pulling me fractionally closer as we turned. You spend a few hours being envied instead of pitied? You let a stranger make your ex-husband realize what he lost? Something reckless awakened in me then. Maybe it was the champagne I'd barely touched. Maybe it was 2 years of being careful, responsible, invisible, 2 years of living so small I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to take up space. Maybe it was the way this man looked at me, not through me or past me, but at me, like I was the only person in a room full of 200 people. One evening, I said, "That's all." "Of course." His smile suggested he knew better. "Tell me about Sophie." "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Her favorite color, what makes her laugh, how she says words she can't quite pronounce yet." So I told him. About Sophie's obsession with purple and dinosaurs, about the way she called spaghetti, paschetti, and refused to be corrected because her version sounded better. About how she'd started asking about fathers lately, questions I didn't know how to answer. "My niece Juliana used to do the same thing," Adolfo said, and something softened in his expression. "Called butterflies flutterbees until she was 6. My sister would try to correct her, but Juliana insisted her way made more sense. She was right, of course." I found myself laughing, actually laughing, and for a moment forgot this was performance, forgot about the deal we'd made. For a moment, it felt almost real. Then David appeared at the edge of the dance floor. "Kate," he said, his voice carrying over the music, "didn't expect to see you here with someone." Adolfo's entire demeanor shifted. It was subtle, the straightening of his spine, the way his hand tightened protectively at my waist, the coolness that settled over his features like frost. When he looked at David, there was something predatory in his gaze, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Adolfo Trevisani," he said, not offering his hand. "And you are?" "David Winfrey, Kate's ex-husband," Adolfo finished, his voice flat. "Yes, she's mentioned you." The way he said it made it abundantly clear that my mentions had not been flattering. David's confidence faltered. "I just wanted to catch up. Perhaps another time." Adolfo cut him off smoothly, already guiding me back into the dance as the next song began. "Kate and I have plans after this." My eyes widened. "We don't have plans," I whispered once David was out of earshot. "We do now," Adolfo replied, his voice low and certain. "Unless you want him thinking he can still approach you whenever he likes." I realized then that this man wasn't just playing a part. He was claiming territory, drawing lines, making it clear to everyone watching, and everyone was watching that I belonged to someone now, that I was under someone's protection. It should have frightened me. Instead, heat rushed through my veins like wildfire. The song ended. Adolfo leaned down, his lips nearly brushing my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "Your family is watching. May I kiss you?" My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was certain he could feel it. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I just nodded. The kiss was soft, controlled, but carried the promise of something far more dangerous. His hand cupped my face with surprising tenderness, while his other arm held me close, and for 3 seconds, 5 seconds, an eternity, the entire ballroom disappeared. When we pulled apart, the room erupted, knowing smiles, excited whispers, the kind of gossip that would spread through the family like wildfire. Kate Winfrey, the family tragedy, had just become the evening's most interesting story. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of champagne toasts and curious glances. Adolfo kept me close, his hand always finding mine between conversations, his presence a constant shield against the awkward questions and thinly veiled judgment I'd been bracing for all night. Aunt Diane actually complimented me. "He's quite distinguished, Kate." "Good for you." The words were stiff, begrudging, but they were something other than pity, and that felt like victory. Jennifer cornered us near the dessert table, her earlier smugness replaced by genuine curiosity. "Where did you two meet? How long has this been going on?" She asked it like she was interrogating a celebrity, hungry for details she could dissect later with the other cousins. "Recently," Adolfo said smoothly, his thumb tracing circles on my hand. "But some connections don't need time to feel inevitable." It was a perfect non-answer that somehow satisfied everyone. Around 11, as the crowd began to thin and the orchestra shifted to slower, mellower songs, Adolfo leaned close. "Should I take you home?" I expected him to call me a cab, maybe walk me to the curb like a gentleman, then disappear into the Manhattan night like the beautiful stranger he was. Instead, he guided me outside, where a sleek black Mercedes waited, a driver in a dark suit standing at attention. "I'll take you home," Adolfo said, opening the door for me. Where do you live? Brooklyn, Sunset Park. I hesitated. It's kind of far. I have time. He slid in beside me, and the driver pulled away from Hudson Yards without needing directions, like he already knew where we were going. Or like he was used to following orders without question. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows as we crossed into Brooklyn. The silence should have been awkward, but instead it felt strangely comfortable, like the quiet that exists between people who've known each other longer than a few hours. What do you really do? I asked finally. Import, export seems vague. It is vague? Adolfo admitted, something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. Family business, shipping routes, logistics, investments. It's boring, mostly. You don't strike me as someone who does boring things. No? He turned to look at me, the city lights casting shadows across his features. What do I strike you as? Dangerous, I said honestly. Like someone who's used to getting what he wants. And what do you think I want, Kate? The question hung in the air between us, weighted with meanings I wasn't ready to examine. His phone buzzed in his pocket once, twice, 3 times in quick succession. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, then silenced it completely without answering. His attention never left me. Tell me about your life, he said instead. Your daughter? Your work? Everything. So I did. I told him about Sophie's obsession with dinosaurs and purple things, about working retail at a bridal boutique after my event planning business had collapsed, about the debt David had left me with and the apartment I could barely afford, and the crushing loneliness of being a single mother in a city that felt too big and too expensive and too indifferent to care. I told him things I'd never told anyone, things I'd barely admitted to myself, and he listened like every word mattered. We arrived at my building, a modest 5-story walk-up with fading brick and a security door that stuck in humid weather. Nothing like the world Adolfo clearly inhabited, where drivers waited and buildings sparkled and everything looked like it belonged in a magazine. He walked me to the door, his hand warm at the small of my back. Thank you, I said, fumbling for my keys. For tonight. For making me feel visible. Adolfo stepped closer, cupping my face with both hands, his thumbs brushing my cheekbones with a tenderness that made my breath catch. You were always visible, Kate. Everyone else was just too blind to see. He kissed me then deeper than before, less controlled, like he'd been holding back all evening and finally couldn't anymore. I kissed him back, my hands finding the lapels of his suit jacket, pulling him closer even as my brain screamed that this was reckless, that I didn't know this man, that I had a daughter sleeping 3 blocks away who depended on me to make smart choices. When we finally pulled apart, he was already moving toward the car. Good night, Kate Winfrey. Then he was gone. The Mercedes disappearing into the Brooklyn night like he'd never been there at all. I picked up Sophie from Mrs. Rodriguez at 8 the next morning, still floating on whatever spell the previous night had cast. Sophie chattered non-stop about the movie they'd watched, Encanto again, her current obsession and the chocolate chip cookies they'd baked, blissfully unaware that her mother's entire world had shifted on its axis. Did you have fun at the party, Mama? She asked, her small hand in mine as we walked the 3 blocks home. I did, baby. I really did. By noon, my phone had become a living thing, buzzing and chirping and lighting up with notifications I couldn't keep up with. Text messages from friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Facebook messages from cousins I barely knew. Even my old business partner from the event planning days had reached out. Oh my God, Kate, who is he? I opened Instagram with a growing sense of dread. Victoria, Melanie's bridesmaid, the one who'd always resented my success before everything fell apart, had posted at least 10 photos from the wedding. Most were of the happy couple, but scattered throughout were pictures of me and Adolfo. Dancing, talking, that kiss on the dance floor that now looked even more intimate, frozen in a photograph. Her caption made my stomach drop. When the single cousin shows up with NYC's most eligible bachelor. Get it, girl. Number Winfrey wedding, number unexpected couple, number goals. The post had over 300 likes, dozens of comments, most supportive but some uncomfortably speculative. Wait, isn't that Adolfo Trevisani? Oh my God, he's loaded. Didn't she just get divorced? Lucky girl. I was still staring at my phone when someone knocked on my apartment door. Sophie was coloring at the kitchen table, humming to herself. I checked the peephole and saw a man in an expensive suit, not Adolfo, but someone who inhabited the same world. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of alertness that suggested military or security training. I opened the door carefully, keeping the chain on. Can I help you? Miss Winfrey? My name is Luca. I work for Mr. Trevisani. His eyes scanned the hallway behind me, the apartment beyond, with professional efficiency. He asked me to check on you. There may be some complications from last night. Complications? I unhooked the chain, stepping into the hallway and closing the door behind me so Sophie wouldn't hear. What kind of complications? Luca's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes looked almost apologetic. Mr. Trevisani is not just a businessman, Miss Winfrey. He's the head of the Trevisani organization, one of New York's most powerful families. Those photographs from last night, they've been noticed by people who pay very close attention to Mr. Trevisani's movements. The words took a moment to process. When they did, I felt the blood drain from my face. You're saying he's, what, Mafia? I'm saying he's someone whose associations matter. And now, whether you intended it or not, you've become one of those associations. Luca handed me a phone, sleek, black, clearly not from any Apple store. He'd like to speak with you. I took it with shaking hands. Hello? Kate. Adolfo's voice came through, familiar and foreign at once. I'm sorry. I didn't anticipate the photographs. I need you to trust me. Luca is going to stay nearby. Just a precaution. A precaution against what? My voice came out sharper than I intended. What have you gotten me into? There was a pause, long enough that I almost thought the connection had dropped. Against people who might think you matter to me. I don't matter to you, I said, though my voice wavered. We just met. Last night was just... That's what I'm trying to convince myself, Adolfo interrupted quietly. So far, it's not working. The line went dead. Luca was already moving toward the stairs. I'll be in the car across the street. You won't see me, but I'll be there. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call that number. Then he was gone too, and I was standing in my hallway holding an encrypted phone, my ordinary life crumbling around me like paper in rain. Inside, Sophie looked up from her coloring book. Mama, who was that man? I knelt beside her, smoothing her dark curls, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Just a friend, sweetheart. The friend from the party? She pointed at my phone, still open to Instagram, to one of those damning photographs. Yes, honey. Sophie studied the picture with 3-year-old seriousness. He's very handsome, like a prince in the stories. I looked out our window at the street below, at the black sedan now parked across from our building, at the ordinary Brooklyn morning that suddenly felt anything but ordinary. I thought about Adolfo's words. You were always visible. For the first time, I wondered if being invisible had actually been safer. But it was too late for that now. Whatever door I'd walked through last night, it was already closing behind me. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Luca or one of his team was always nearby, never intrusive, but present. A shadow in a parked car across from my building, a figure browsing magazines while I shopped for groceries, a suited man drinking coffee at the cafe where I bought Sophie her morning hot chocolate. Sophie thought they were Mama's new friends, which was easier than explaining that we were being protected from people I didn't understand by a man I barely knew. I'd called Adolfo twice. Both times, he'd answered immediately but kept the conversations frustratingly brief. I'm handling this. Stay close to Luca. I'll explain everything soon. When is soon? Soon. Then he'd hung up, leaving me with more questions than answers, and a growing fear that whatever I'd walked into that night at the wedding was far more dangerous than I'd imagined. The incident happened on a Tuesday evening. I was closing the White Room, the bridal boutique where I'd worked for the past year, helping other women plan the happily ever afters I'd never gotten. It was 8 o'clock, raining, the kind of steady Manhattan downpour that turned the Upper East Side streets into rivers of reflected neon and taxi lights. I was locking the front door, my umbrella tucked under my arm, when a black SUV pulled up to the curb. 2 men emerged. Expensive suits, polite expressions, the kind of grooming that suggested money and power. But something about them made every instinct I had scream danger. Miss Winfrey, the taller one said, his voice smooth and practiced. We'd like to speak with you about Adolfo Trevisani. My hand tightened on my keys, the metal biting into my palm. I don't know what you're talking about. Please don't insult our intelligence. The second man stepped closer, and I caught his accent, Eastern European, Russian maybe. You've been seen with him, photographed with him. You're important to him. That makes you important to us. I don't know what you think. We think, the taller man interrupted gently, that you're a civilian who's gotten caught up in things she doesn't understand. We'd like to help you understand them. Before I could respond, before I could scream or run or do any of the things my panicking brain was telling me to do, Luca appeared from seemingly nowhere, positioning himself between me and the two men with the fluid precision of someone trained for exactly this scenario. The energy shifted immediately. What had felt like a polite conversation turned predatory, dangerous, like watching wolves circle each other before a fight. "Dmitri," Luca said coldly, his hand moving subtly toward something beneath his jacket. "Didn't realize the Bratva was recruiting on the Upper East Side." Dmitri, the shorter man with the Russian accent, smiled without any warmth reaching his eyes. "Just having a conversation, Luca. No harm intended. Conversation's over." For a long moment, nobody moved. Rain drummed on the awning above us, and somewhere down the street, a car horn blared. Then Dmitri's smile widened, and he looked past Luca directly at me. "Tell Trevisani that Volkov is interested in meeting the woman who's captured his attention. We'll be in touch." Then they were gone, sliding back into the SUV and disappearing into Manhattan traffic like they'd never been there at all. My legs felt weak. We need to move. Now." Luca's hand was on my elbow, guiding me toward a black sedan I hadn't noticed parked half a block away. "Miss Winfrey, I need you to trust me. My daughter is safe," Luca said firmly, opening the car door. "My wife Rosa is with her at your apartment. She's a mother herself. Sophie is in good hands." Luca didn't take me home. Instead, he drove us through rain-slicked streets to Tribeca, to a building with a doorman in a pristine uniform and the kind of lobby that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. The apartment he led me to was on the 23rd floor, all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture, and the kind of space that probably cost more per month than I made in a year. "Mr. Trevisani will meet you here," Luca said, his eyes scanning the street below through the windows. "Rosa will bring Sophie if you need her, but for tonight, it's safer if she stays where she is." "This is serious, isn't it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes, Miss Winfrey." Luca's expression was almost apologetic. "It is." Adolfo arrived an hour later. I'd spent the time pacing, calling Rosa twice to confirm Sophie was okay. She was, apparently watching Encanto again and eating the cookies Rosa had made and trying not to have a complete breakdown. When the door opened, I barely recognized him. The charming man from the wedding was gone, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous. He wore dark clothing, tactical, I thought they called it, and there was a tension in his movements I hadn't seen before, like a predator ready to spring. "Kate." My name came out rough, like he'd been holding his breath. "Tell me exactly what they said." I recounted the encounter, every word I could remember. As I spoke, Adolfo's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring out the windows at the city beyond. "I need to tell you the truth," he said finally. "All of it." So he did. About the Trevisani family and their control of shipping routes and financial networks throughout the Northeast. About careful alliances and strategic positioning that had kept them in power for 3 generations. About the Bratva, the Russian mob pushing into their territory, testing boundaries, looking for weaknesses. "The wedding," Adolfo said, turning to face me. "I was there because the Castellanos are considering an alliance. They control ports I need for legitimate business. But when I saw you saw an opportunity," I finished, bitterness creeping into my voice despite my best efforts. "Someone to make you look human, relatable, less like a no." He crossed the room in 3 strides, gripping my shoulders, his amber eyes fierce. "I saw someone who looked the way I've felt for years alone in a room full of people who don't see you. I didn't plan what happened between us. I didn't plan to feel anything. Dmitri Volkov is second in command of the Bratva's New York operations," Adolfo continued, releasing me and stepping back. "He's ruthless, strategic, and he's been looking for leverage against me for months. Now he thinks you're that leverage." The words settled over me like ice water. "So, take it back. Tell them I don't matter. Tell them it was just one evening, just a performance." "I can't." "Why not?" Adolfo's expression cracked, vulnerability bleeding through the dangerous exterior. "Because it would be a lie. And in my world, lies get exposed. Weaknesses get exploited. The truth is always safer, even when it's dangerous." "What truth?" I demanded, my voice rising. "That you matter to me," Adolfo said quietly. "More than is wise, more than is safe, more than I've allowed anything to matter in 10 years." The confession hung in the air between us. Outside, Rain continued its steady assault on the windows, and somewhere in the building, someone's footsteps echoed in the hallway. "I can move you," Adolfo said finally. "You and Sophie. New identities, new city, financial security, a fresh start far from New York, and everything that's happened. Or you can let me protect you here, in my world, with all the danger that entails." "I need to think," I whispered. "You have until morning," Adolfo replied. "After that, Volkov will make his next move, and your window for choosing closes." My phone rang then, the sound jarring in the quiet apartment. I pulled it from my pocket with shaking hands. "Eric, my brother." "Kate, I need to see you." His voice sounded wrong, panicked, desperate. "It's important, please." I glanced at Adolfo, who nodded carefully. "Tomorrow," I told Eric. "I'll meet you tomorrow." After I hung up, Adolfo made arrangements with Luca, positioning additional security, discussing protocols I didn't understand. Eventually, he told me to rest, that we'd talk more in the morning. But I couldn't sleep. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights blur through rain, thinking about Sophie sleeping safe and oblivious in our apartment, thinking about the choice I had to make, thinking about how one dance had somehow led to this moment. Adolfo approached from behind, close enough that I felt his warmth, but not touching. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "For what?" "For being the kind of man who ruins ordinary lives just by touching them." I turned to face him. This dangerous stranger who'd seen me when I was invisible, who'd made me feel alive for the first time in years, who was offering me both escape and danger in equal measure. "Maybe my life needed ruining," I said quietly. "Maybe ordinary was just another word for invisible." His hand found mine in the darkness, and we stood together watching the storm, both of us knowing that by morning, everything would change again. The diner in Queens was the kind of place where nobody asked questions. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape, coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since morning, and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly sick. Luca had insisted on neutral territory, with 2 of his men positioned outside in a sedan, watching the street. Eric looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles carved deep under his eyes, hands shaking so badly his coffee cup rattled against the saucer when he set it down. My brother, 2 years younger than me, the one who'd always been Mom's favorite, the one who'd gotten all the second chances I'd never been offered, looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm in trouble," he said without preamble. "Bad trouble, Kate." I waited, my own coffee untouched, my stomach already knotting with dread. "I've been gambling." The words came out haltingly, like each one cost him something. Started small. Poker games with friends from work, sports betting, nothing serious. But it escalated. I'm into a loan shark for $75,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. "Eric, what the hell?" "The loan shark is connected to the Bratva," he continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "The Russian mob, the same people who... Kate, they know about you. About Adolfo. They said they'd forgive the debt if I gave them information." Ice flooded my veins. "What kind of information?" "About you, where you'd be, Sophie's schedule, her daycare, her routines." Eric's voice broke. "I swear to God, Kate, I didn't tell them anything. I said I didn't know, that we weren't close, but they're pressuring me. They said if I don't give them something by Friday, they'll..." He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I wanted to scream, wanted to rage at my brother's stupidity, his selfishness, the way he'd gambled not just with his own life but with mine and Sophie's. But looking at Eric's hollow eyes, his shaking hands, I saw something familiar. Desperation. The same desperation that had made me stay with David too long, hoping he'd change. The same desperation that made me work double shifts to keep Sophie in a decent preschool. "You're going to tell Adolfo everything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Kate, no, you don't understand who these people are." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "Which is why you're going to tell him. Now." Back at the Tribeca safe house, Eric repeated his confession. Adolfo listened without interruption, standing by the windows with his back to us, his posture rigid. When Eric finally finished, there was a long, terrible silence. "How much do you owe?" Adolfo asked, his voice devoid of emotion. $75,000. Adolfo nodded once. "It's paid. As of this moment, your debt is cleared." Eric's mouth fell open. I don't understand." "You will work for me," Adolfo said, turning to face us both. His expression was cold, controlled, nothing like the man who'd held me the night before. Not in my organization, I don't trust you enough for that. But you'll provide information about the Bratva's collection operations, their loan structures, their vulnerable points. You become my informant, or you can take your chances with Volkov. It wasn't a choice. We all knew it. After Luca escorted Eric out to a separate secure location, somewhere the Bratva wouldn't find him, I rounded on Adolfo. You can't just buy my brother's loyalty. I didn't buy his loyalty, Adolfo replied calmly, pouring himself a drink from the bar. I bought his compliance. There's a difference. He's my family. He sold you out. Adolfo's control finally cracked, the glass slamming down on the counter. He was ready to hand over your schedule, Sophie's routine, to people who would use them as weapons against me, against you. Family doesn't do that, Kate. The words hit like a slap because they were true. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for people who'd hurt me, David's mistakes, my mother's concerns, my family's constant disappointment. I'd spent so long trying to maintain connections to people who'd never protected me the way they should have. What kind of person does this? I asked quietly. Your world, I mean. What kind of person thrives in it? Adolfo considered the question, his anger fading into something more contemplative. People who've learned that loyalty is earned, not inherited. People who've lost enough that they know what's actually worth protecting. Is that what happened to you? You lost someone? For a long moment, I didn't think he'd answer. Then he crossed to the couch, sitting heavily, suddenly looking older than his years. My sister, Juliana. His voice was soft, almost reverent. She was 17, beautiful, brilliant, wanted to be a doctor. She was killed in crossfire between rival families, a conflict my father had tried to avoid through negotiation, through honor, and the old ways. I sat beside him, close enough to touch but not touching yet. My father believed that reason could prevent bloodshed. Adolfo continued. He thought if we were fair, if we were honorable, everyone else would be too. He was wrong. Juliana paid the price for his idealism. I'm sorry, I whispered. After she died, I rebuilt everything. New foundation, new rules, absolute control, strategic ruthlessness. Protecting what matters above all else. He finally looked at me, his amber eyes fierce. I won't let what happened to her happen to anyone under my protection again. That includes you. That includes Sophie. Something shifted between us then. I saw past the dangerous exterior, past the Mafia boss and the controlled violence, to the man underneath the brother who'd failed to save his sister and spent 10 years trying to prevent anyone else from experiencing that loss. I reached up, cupping his face in my hands. You can't control everything, Adolfo. I can try, he whispered. The kiss was different this time, not performance, not strategy, but something raw and desperate. He pulled me closer, his hands tangling in my hair, and I let myself fall into it, into him. When he lifted me, carrying me toward the bedroom, I didn't protest. For the first time in years, I let myself feel something beyond fear and exhaustion and the constant weight of responsibility. I let myself feel wanted. I woke to find Adolfo already dressed, speaking rapid Italian on his phone by the windows. Dawnlight filtered through the glass, turning Manhattan gold and pink. When he noticed I was awake, he ended the call abruptly. Volkov has made his move, he said, his voice grim. He's demanded a meeting. He'll stay out of the shipping routes if I hand over 3 warehouses in Brooklyn and sever my alliance with the Castellanos. What are you going to do? Meet with him tomorrow night, at a warehouse on the Hudson River waterfront. Neutral territory. Adolfo's jaw tightened. And refuse. I don't negotiate when someone threatens what's mine. Adolfo. I want you and Sophie moved to a property upstate, he continued, cutting off my protest. Just until this is resolved. It's not a request, Kate. I was about to argue when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. The text message made my blood run cold. Your daughter Sophie looks beautiful in her purple coat. It would be a shame if something happened to her. Tell Trevisani we need to talk. Alone. DV. Attached was a photo. Sophie leaving our apartment building with Rosa. Taken this morning. My daughter's face was clear, focused, deliberate. They'd been close enough to touch her. My hands shook as I showed Adolfo the message. His face went completely blank, a stillness that was more terrifying than any rage could have been. They have someone watching the building, he said quietly, his voice deadly calm. They've been watching all along. He made a call quick, sharp Italian, then turned to me. Pack a bag. We're moving you now. Both of you. Where? Somewhere they'll never find you. He pulled me close, his hand cradling the back of my head. "I promise you, Kate, they will never touch her. Never." And looking into his eyes, I believed him. Adolfo activated full security protocols within minutes. Phone calls in rapid Italian, orders given in a voice that left no room for argument. Rosa arrived at the safe house 20 minutes later with Sophie, who bounced through the door like this was the greatest adventure of her life. "Mama, Rosa says we're having a sleepover in a castle." I caught her up in my arms, holding her so tightly she squeaked in protest. "Mama, you're squishing me." "Sorry, baby," I whispered into her hair, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, letting the solid reality of her chase away the image of that photograph. "I just missed you." The strategy session happened in the living room while Sophie watched cartoons in the bedroom with Rosa standing guard. Adolfo's core team assembled quickly. Luca, a man named Paolo, who Adolfo introduced as his second-in-command, and Natasha, a woman who looked barely 25 but carried herself with the bearing of someone much older and far more dangerous. Natasha pulled out a laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The photo's metadata shows it was taken from across the street, probably with a telephoto lens. They wanted you to know they could reach her, but they haven't actually made physical contact. "Yet," Paolo added grimly, his arms crossed over his chest. Adolfo stood by the windows, his back to us, tension radiating from every line of his body. "Volkov's demand is clear. I meet him alone tomorrow night to negotiate terms, or the Bratva escalates." "It's a trap," Luca said immediately. "You go in alone, you don't come out." "Probably," Adolfo agreed, his voice flat. "But if I don't go, Volkov interprets it as weakness. He pushes harder. The next message won't be a photo, it'll be an action." "You're not going alone," I said. Everyone turned to look at me. Adolfo's expression was a mixture of frustration and something that might have been fear. "Kate? They already think I'm leverage." I interrupted, standing. "Let's use that. I walk in with you. Volkov sees that I'm not afraid of him, that we're a united front. It changes the dynamic." "Absolutely not." Adolfo crossed the room in 3 strides. "Kate, these men are killers." "So are you," I replied steadily, holding his gaze. "The difference is, you've given me a reason to trust you. Let me stand with you. Let me be more than something you protect. Let me be your partner." The silence stretched. Paolo muttered something in Italian that sounded like a curse. Luca's expression suggested he thought I was insane. But Adolfo was looking at me like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. "Conditions," he said finally. "You wear a wire. You stay by my side at all times. At the first sign of danger, you do exactly what Luca tells you to do. No arguments." "Agreed." "This is insane," Paolo muttered. "Most things worth doing are," Adolfo replied, his eyes never leaving mine. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Natasha fitted me with a listening device disguised as a delicate silver necklace. Luca drilled me on exit strategies, on how to position myself, on what to do if shooting started. The instructions were clinical, terrifying, and somehow comforting in their precision. Sophie was moved to a secured estate in Westchester, with Rosa and Adolfo's elderly aunt Francesca. I video called her before we left, forcing brightness into my voice. "Where are you going, Mama?" "Just some boring grown-up business, sweetheart. I'll be back before bedtime tomorrow. Be good for Rosa and Aunt Francesca." "Is the prince going with you?" Sophie asked, and I realized she meant Adolfo, standing just out of frame. "Yes, honey, the prince is going with me." "Good," Sophie declared with 3-year-old certainty. "Princes keep people safe." The warehouse was exactly what I'd expected from movies: vast, empty, smelling of rust and Hudson River water. One dim light hung from the ceiling, creating a circle of illumination in the center of the space. Shadows pooled in the corners where anything could be hiding. Dmitry Volkov was already there with 4 men. All armed, all watching with the patient stillness of predators. Volkov himself was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, handsome in a cold way, with pale blue eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. He smiled when he saw me. "Miss Winfrey, so brave of you to come, or so foolish. I haven't decided which." Adolfo kept me slightly behind him, his body language protective but controlled. "You wanted to talk, Dmitri, so talk." Volkov circled us slowly, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "I'm a reasonable man, Trevisani. I'm willing to overlook your disrespect in rejecting my previous offer. But the woman changes things." "How?" "She's a weakness," Volkov said simply. "And in our world, Weaknesses are expensive. So here's my revised offer. You give me the warehouses, the Castellano Alliance, and one more thing, you let me meet with Miss Winfrey privately. Just a conversation. 10 minutes. I felt Adolfo tense beside me, his hand tightening fractionally on my arm. To what end? Adolfo asked, his voice dangerous. To understand what makes her worth all this trouble? Volkov replied, his eyes on me. To see if she's truly strong enough for this world, or if she's just a civilian playing dress-up. Before Adolfo could refuse, before he could do whatever violent thing I saw brewing in his expression, I stepped forward. I'll do it. Kate. 10 minutes, I said, looking directly at Volkov. You want to know if I'm strong enough? Fine, let's find out. Volkov's smile widened. Excellent. This way, Miss Winfrey. He led me to a corner of the warehouse, far enough from Adolfo to be private but still visible. His men maintained their positions, weapons ready but not raised. You love him, Volkov said. It wasn't a question. What I feel isn't your business. It is when it affects mine. He studied me with those cold blue eyes. Adolfo Trevisani has been untouchable for 10 years. No vices, no weaknesses, no one he cares about more than the organization. Then you appear, and suddenly he's making reckless choices, threatening war over a woman he met days ago. Maybe he's just evolved, I said steadily. Maybe he's realized there are things worth protecting beyond territory and profit. Volkov's expression shifted, something like respect flickering across his features. His sister died because his father was soft. Did he tell you that? Because he valued honor over pragmatism. Adolfo swore he'd never make that mistake. But here he is, risking everything for you. History repeating itself. Or, I said, my voice stronger now. Maybe the lesson wasn't, never care about anything. Maybe it was, be strong enough to protect what you care about. There's a difference. Volkov was silent for a long moment. Then he laughed, genuinely surprised. You know, Miss Winfrey, I expected fear, pleading maybe, but you're standing here lecturing me about strength. He shook his head. You might actually survive this world. Here's what I'm willing to do, Volkov continued, his tone shifting to business. Adolfo keeps his warehouses, keeps his alliance, but he owes me a favor to be named later. One operation, one job, one thing I need when I need it. He agrees, and you and your daughter are untouchable. The Bratva never comes near you again. And if he refuses? Volkov's smile disappeared. Then we find out if he really has learned from his father's mistakes. We find out if his love for you is strength or suicide. I returned to Adolfo, relaying Volkov's offer. His jaw was tight with fury, but his eyes were calculating, weighing options I couldn't see. A blank check. Paolo's voice came through the wire. Boss, you can't agree to that. But Adolfo was looking at me, at the woman who'd just walked into a corner with his most dangerous enemy and emerged unbroken. At the future that might include something beyond violence. I agree, Adolfo said. On one condition. The favor can never involve harming Kate or Sophie, directly or indirectly. Volkov considered, then extended his hand. Deal. As they shook, I knew we'd just traded one danger for another. But we'd also bought time. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. 2 weeks after the warehouse meeting with Volkov, life had settled into something resembling normal, if normal could include living 30 floors above Central Park in a penthouse with bulletproof windows and armed guards in the lobby. Sophie thought it was a castle. She'd run from room to room that first day, her voice echoing off the high ceilings, declaring each space more magical than the last. Mama, look, the bathroom has a chandelier. I'd quit my job at the bridal boutique. Adolfo had offered me a position managing his legitimate businesses, 3 restaurants, 2 import companies, a portfolio of real estate holdings across the city. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was finally using my event planning and organizational skills again, just for a man whose other business dealings I didn't ask too many questions about. We existed in an interesting space, Adolfo and I. Not quite domestic, but no longer strangers. He taught Sophie Italian phrases over breakfast: buongiorno, grazie, ti voglio bene. She made him laugh with her mispronunciations and her 3-year-old logic. We'd fallen into the rhythm of a family, even if the foundation was anything but traditional. At night, in the darkness of our shared bedroom, Adolfo whispered truths he'd never told anyone. His fears about losing control, his failures that still haunted him, the weight of every decision that cost lives. I listened and offered what I could not, absolution, because I wasn't naive enough to think love erased blood, but acceptance. He was who he was. I was choosing to love him anyway. Sophie had adapted with the resilience only children possess. She adored Rosa, who'd become a surrogate grandmother, baking cookies and teaching her to make fresh pasta. She thought Luca was the coolest uncle ever, especially when he let her sit in the front seat of his car in the parking garage. She'd been enrolled in an exclusive private school, where her classmates had names like Ainsley and Prescott and vacation homes in the Hamptons. One evening, Sophie looked up from her coloring book. "Mama, is Adolfo my daddy now?" I froze, crayon suspended over the paper. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "My friend Mia says daddies are the people who take care of you and your mama. Adolfo takes care of us. So is he my daddy?" I glanced toward the doorway where Adolfo had stopped mid-stride, his expression vulnerable in a way that made my heart ache. He crossed the room and knelt beside Sophie, bringing himself to her eye level. "Your daddy is the man who should have stayed," he said gently, his accent softening his words. "I can't replace him, but if you'll let me, I'd like to be someone who takes care of you, someone you can count on. Would that be okay?" Sophie considered this with 3-year-old seriousness, her head tilted. Then she nodded. "Okay. Can you still teach me more Italian words?" "As many as you want, Piccola," Adolfo said, and I saw his eyes were suspiciously bright. Adolfo insisted I meet his family properly, not the soldiers and associates, but his blood relatives. The dinner was held at his estate in Westchester, a sprawling property that somehow managed to be both fortress and home, with manicured gardens and security cameras hidden among the roses. I was terrified. Bianca Trevisani was elegant and sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who could reduce you to rubble with a single glance. She took one look at me and said in Italian, "So, this is the woman who's made my son human again." Adolfo responded in rapid Italian, but Bianca waved him off. No, she should hear this. "Kate, come sit with me." Over espresso in her sitting room, Bianca told me about Giuliana. "She was like sunshine," she said, her hands wrapped around her cup, always laughing, always singing. "After she died, Adolfo became stone. Necessary for survival, perhaps, but terrible for living. You bring color back," Bianca continued, studying me. "And your daughter, she's given him something he thought he'd lost forever." "What's that?" I asked. "Hope that life can be more than just survival." Before we left, Bianca pulled me aside in the hallway. "This world will try to break you," she said bluntly. "It will test you in ways you cannot imagine. People will die. Adolfo will make decisions that horrify you. You will question everything." I swallowed hard. "Are you trying to scare me away?" "No," Bianca said, her hand finding mine. "I'm preparing you, because I see the way my son looks at you. And I haven't seen that look since before Giuliana died. You're not just his lover, you're his reason to believe there's something worth building beyond the empire. Don't waste that." Meanwhile, Eric had been providing intel on the Bratvas operations. Through him, Adolfo learned that Volkov was planning an expansion into legitimate businesses, positioning himself to take over the very warehouses Adolfo had refused to surrender. He never intended to keep the peace, Paolo said during a strategy meeting I wasn't supposed to overhear. The deal was to buy time while he positioned his pieces. But Adolfo was positioning his own pieces too. He accelerated his plans with the Castellanos, consolidating control over shipping routes and port access. Then he did something that shocked everyone. He started divesting from the violent side of the business. "I'm getting out of weapons, drugs, anything that targets civilians," he told his core team over dinner one night. "We focus on financial operations, legitimate businesses, strategic positioning." Luca's fork clattered against his plate. "Boss, that's a massive revenue loss." "Short term, yes," Adolfo agreed calmly. "Long term, it makes us untouchable. The feds can't build a case on import, export, and real estate. We become too legitimate to prosecute, too connected to topple." Later, I confronted him in our bedroom. "You're doing this because of me, because of Sophie." "I'm doing this because it's smart," Adolfo countered, but his expression softened. "Because I'm tired of building an empire on bodies. Because maybe my father's way wasn't weakness, maybe it was evolution, and I was too angry to see it. You could lose everything," I said. "Or I could finally build something that lasts." He pulled me close, his hand cradling the back of my head. "I've spent 10 years being feared. I'd rather spend the next 10 being someone Sophie can be proud to know." The fragile peace shattered on a Thursday afternoon when Natasha burst into Adolfo's office, her laptop open. "Volkov knows. About Eric. He's coming for him." They'll go after Kate and Sophie to punish him, Luca said immediately. Use them to draw Eric out, then kill all three. Within an hour, Sophie and I were being moved to the Westchester estate, surrounded by enough security to protect a head of state. Eric was brought to a separate location, looking like a ghost. This is what I was afraid of, I said that night, standing in the doorway of Sophie's room, watching her sleep in the heavily secured bedroom. That loving you would make us targets. No, Adolfo said firmly, his hand finding mine. Eric's choices made you targets. I'm what's keeping you alive. When Eric arrived the next morning, escorted by Paolo, he looked broken. I'm so sorry, he told me, tears already streaming down his face. I never meant for any of this. I looked at my brother at the weakness, the selfishness, the repeated failures. I thought about David, about all the times I'd made excuses for people who hurt me. You need help, Eric, I said finally. Real help. Adolfo will protect you through this, but when it's over, you're going to rehab. You're going to get your life together. And if you ever put Sophie at risk again, I'm done. No more chances. Do you understand? He nodded, unable to speak. That night, Adolfo revealed his plan. We use Eric as bait. Draw out whoever the Bratva sends, capture them, then negotiate from a position of strength. You're using my brother as bait? I asked. I'm giving him a chance to fix what he broke, Adolfo corrected. He wants to make this right? This is how. Later, I stood on the estate's balcony wrapped in Adolfo's jacket, watching security patrol the grounds. Adolfo joined me, his arms sliding around my waist. We're going to get through this, he murmured against my hair. And then what? I asked. What comes after? There's always another threat, another rival, another crisis. Then we handle it, Adolfo said, together, until the day comes when there aren't any more threats, when I've built something safe enough that Sophie can grow up without looking over her shoulder. I turned in his arms. Do you really think that's possible? That kind of peace? Adolfo kissed my forehead. I never did before. But you make me want to try. The plan was set with military precision. Eric would meet a Bratva contact at a warehouse in Red Hook, supposedly to sell information about Adolfo's security protocols. In reality, Adolfo's team would be positioned throughout the building, ready to capture whoever Volkov sent. I insisted on being there. Absolutely not, Adolfo said, his jaw tight. I'm not sitting in a safe house while my brother risks his life to fix his mistakes, I replied. I'm coming. We compromised. I'd be in a surveillance van with Natasha, watching feeds from inside the warehouse. Armed, protected, but present. The warehouse was industrial and cavernous, perfect for an ambush from either side. Eric arrived first, visibly nervous. He was wired for sound, and I could hear his breathing through the speakers, shallow, panicked. You can do this, I whispered, though he couldn't hear me. On the monitors, I watched Adolfo position himself on the second-floor catwalk with Luca and 2 other men. Paolo led another team at ground level. 4 exit points, all covered. It was a perfect trap. The Bratva sent 3 men. Not Dmitri, that was the first sign something was wrong. The lead man was brutal-looking, with a shaved head and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Sergei, Natasha identified quietly, Volkov's enforcer. You have information for us? Sergei asked Eric, his voice devoid of warmth. Eric stumbled through his rehearsed lines about security shifts and vulnerable access points, buying time for Adolfo's team to move into position. But Sergei wasn't interested. We know you're working for Trevisani, he said flatly. We've known for a week. Everything happened at once. The warehouse exploded with movement. Bratva soldiers emerged from positions. Adolfo's team hadn't spotted hiding in shipping containers, behind false walls, positions they'd occupied since before Eric arrived. 8 men, heavily armed, turning the tables. It's a counter-trap, Natasha yelled, her fingers flying across her keyboard. They knew we'd be here. Gunfire erupted. On the monitors, I watched Adolfo's team scramble for cover, pinned down by superior positioning. Eric dove behind a crate, screaming. Blood bloomed on one of Paolo's men's shoulders as he fell. We need to call the police, Natasha said, reaching for her phone. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. That gets everyone arrested, including Adolfo. My mind raced. I thought about Volkov's words in that other warehouse. You might actually survive this world. Maybe it was time to prove it. I pulled out the encrypted phone Adolfo had given me and dialed the number I'd only called once before. Miss Winfrey, Volkov's voice carried genuine surprise. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. Sergei and his team are in Red Hook right now, trying to kill Adolfo, I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. I need to know if that's your order or if he's gone rogue. There was a pause. Why would you call me instead of letting Trevisani handle it? Because if Sergei is operating on your authority, then our deal is void and we're at war, I said. But if he's acting independently, then you have a problem, a subordinate making moves without your permission, potentially starting a conflict you negotiated to avoid. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear calculations happening in that silence, pieces moving on a chessboard I was only beginning to understand. What do you want from me? Volkov finally asked. Call him off, I said. Prove that your word means something. Prove that the deal we made wasn't just theater. And what do I get? My mind raced through options, through leverage I didn't have. I'll convince Adolfo to fulfill your favor early. Whatever you need, within the terms we agreed on, he'll do it within the next 3 months. You get your debt paid and proof that we honor our agreements. You can't promise that, Volkov said. I can, I replied, my voice stronger now, because I understand something about Adolfo that you don't. He's not like his father. He won't sacrifice people he loves for principle. But he's also not just a killer anymore. He's building something new. And I'm part of that. When I make a promise on behalf of what we're building together, he'll honor it. Volkov was silent for a long moment. Then, stay on the line. I heard him making another call in Russian, his voice sharp with command. Through the warehouse monitors, I watched Sergei suddenly press his hand to his earpiece, his expression shifting from determination to confusion to fury. He barked orders in Russian. The Bratva soldiers began to withdraw, their movements disciplined despite obvious reluctance. Within 3 minutes, the warehouse was clear, except for Adolfo's team and Eric, who was still cowering behind his crate. Volkov came back on the line. Sergei thought he was being proactive. He wasn't authorized. Consider this my demonstration of good faith. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me yet, Miss Winfrey. You just promised me Trevisani's services. I'll be collecting. Soon. The line went dead. I stumbled out of the van as Adolfo emerged from the warehouse, his face a mixture of relief and fury. He crossed to me in long strides, his hands gripping my shoulders. What did you do? He demanded. I explained the call, the negotiation, the promise. Adolfo's team gathered around, listening in disbelief. Even Luca looked impressed. You negotiated with Volkov, Adolfo said slowly. Without authorization, without backup. I negotiated a solution, I corrected. Without bloodshed, without war. Isn't that what you wanted? Adolfo stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed, an actual, genuine laugh that sounded rusty from disuse. He pulled me into his arms, kissing me hard. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most insane, he said against my lips. Can't it be both? Eric approached, shaking and grateful. Kate, you saved my life. I saved all our lives, I corrected, turning to face him. Now you're going to do something with that life besides waste it. Understood? Eric nodded, and for the first time, I saw genuine determination in his eyes instead of just fear. Back at the penthouse later that night, after Sophie was asleep and the adrenaline had finally faded, Adolfo and I faced what I'd done. Volkov will call in the favor, Adolfo said quietly, standing by the windows. It could be anything within our agreed parameters. It could cost money, resources, reputation. I know, I said. But the alternative was watching you die. Was Sophie losing you? Was everything we're building ending in that warehouse? I crossed to him, meeting his eyes. Was it the wrong choice? Adolfo pulled me close, his hand cradling the back of my head. No, it was brave, reckless, and brilliant. It was exactly what I would have done if I'd thought of it first. He kissed my temple. You're not just surviving this world anymore, Kate. You're changing it. That night, I lay awake long after Adolfo fell asleep beside me. I thought about the phone call, the negotiation, the way I'd stepped into his world not as a victim or a bystander, but as a player. I thought about the woman who'd sat alone at that wedding, invisible and pitied, nursing her humiliation like a wound. That woman would never have called a Russian mob boss. That woman would have hidden and hoped someone else would fix things. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I'd become someone who fought for what she loved, even if what she loved was dangerous, complicated, and wrapped in darkness. Adolfo's arm tightened around my waist in his sleep, and I finally closed my eyes, ready for whatever came next. 3 months after the warehouse, Volkov called in his favor. I'd been expecting something impossible, a demand that would cost us everything we'd built. Instead, Volkov wanted something I never saw coming. He wanted Adolfo to broker peace. The Bratva and the Balducci family had been at war over territory in New Jersey for 2 years. Bodies were piling up, profits were bleeding out, and both sides were too proud to be the first to negotiate. Volkov wanted Adolfo as mediator neutral ground, respected by both families. It's brilliant, Paolo admitted grudgingly during the strategy meeting. If you broker the peace, you become the power broker. Both families owe you. Volkov gets peace without looking weak, and you gain influence. It's also incredibly dangerous, Luca added. The Balduccis hate the Bratva. This could go very wrong. But Adolfo agreed, and when he told me where the meeting would be held, I felt something shift in my chest. The glass terrace at Hudson Yards, where it all began. The wedding venue had been transformed into a negotiation space still elegant, still overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline, but configured for war councils instead of celebrations. 2 long tables faced each other, neutral territory marked by expensive furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows. Adolfo brought me with him. "You're my partner," he said simply when I questioned it. "You helped create this peace. You should be there to see it formalized." The negotiation took hours. There were threats, accusations, old wounds reopened like infected cuts. The Balducci patriarch, a man in his 70s who'd seen every kind of violence, accused the Bratva of killing his nephew. Volkov countered with his own list of grievances, names of soldiers lost, territory stolen. But slowly, painfully, Adolfo guided them toward compromise. He spoke about the cost of endless war, about children growing up to inherit conflicts they didn't start, about legacy that extended beyond body counts and territory lines. At one point, when tensions threatened to explode when the Balducci patriarch stood, his hand moving toward something beneath his jacket, I found myself speaking. "My daughter is 3 years old," I said, my voice cutting through the building violence. "She doesn't know what you do, what any of you do. She just knows that some people are safe and some aren't. What world are you building for your children? One where they inherit your wars, or one where they might actually live in peace?" The room fell silent. Kate's words, coming from outside their world, from a mother rather than a soldier, carried unexpected weight. The Balducci patriarch slowly sat back down. By sunset, they had terms: territory divided, conflicts resolved, reparations agreed upon. Volkov and the Balducci patriarch shook hands, their grips white-knuckled but genuine. As the families departed, Volkov approached me privately. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Winfrey. Is that a good thing? In this world? Usually not." He actually smiled. "But in your case, maybe Trevisani has found something stronger than fear. Maybe he's found purpose." That night, Adolfo arranged a private celebration at the penthouse. Just close family: Bianca, who'd flown in from Tuscany, Aunt Francesca, Luca and Rosa, Paolo, Natasha, even Eric. 6 weeks sober and working a legitimate job at one of Adolfo's restaurants. Sophie was in her element, charming everyone with her improved Italian and her dramatic retellings of preschool adventures. She had Luca wrapped around her finger, making him act out different characters in her stories. "She has your courage," Bianca told me, watching Sophie boss grown men around with 3-year-old authority. "And your strength. She'll be formidable someday." After everyone left, after Sophie was tucked into bed with her collection of dinosaur plushies, Adolfo led me out onto the penthouse terrace. Manhattan spread below us, lights glittering like diamonds scattered across velvet. "Do you remember the first thing I said to you?" Adolfo asked. "You said I looked better on the dance floor with you." "I was right," Adolfo said, turning to face me. "But I was also wrong. You don't look better anywhere specific. You look better beside me, period. You make everything better." He knelt, pulling out a ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds, the green perfectly matching the dress I'd worn that first night. "Kate Winfrey, I'm not a good man. I've done things I can never undo, hurt people I can't make amends to. My world is dangerous, complicated, and it will never be completely safe." His voice was rough with emotion, his hands steady despite everything. "But I love you. I love Sophie. I want to build a life where that love matters more than all the darkness. Will you marry me?" I looked at this man, this killer, this protector, this person who'd seen me when I was invisible and given me the strength to become someone new. "Yes," I said. tears already streaming down my face. Not because you're perfect, but because you're trying. Because you let me see your worst parts and trusted me to stay anyway. Because you gave me a dance when I'd forgotten how, and you've been dancing with me ever since. When we kissed, I tasted salt, his tears, or mine. I wasn't sure. It didn't matter. 6 months later, we were married. The wedding was small, intimate, not a performance like the one where we'd met, but something real. Sophie was the flower girl, taking her job with the utmost seriousness, her purple dress perfectly coordinated with the garden flowers. Eric walked me down the aisle, sober and steady, his hand shaking only slightly when he placed mine in Adolfo's. Bianca cried openly. Aunt Francesca muttered prayers in Italian. Even Luca looked suspiciously emotional. The ceremony was held at the Westchester estate, in the garden where Sophie played on weekends, where she'd learned to be unafraid of the world. No massive guest list, no business alliances being forged. Just family, the one I was born into and the one I'd chosen. Adolfo's vows were simple. I promise to protect you, to see you, to never let you become invisible again. I promise to be the kind of man Sophie can be proud to call family. I promise to dance with you, Kate, until the music stops. My vows made half the guests cry. I promise to stand with you in the darkness and believe in the light you're trying to build. I promise to be your partner, not your possession. I promise to remind you that strength isn't just about power, it's about choosing love even when it's dangerous. And I promise to keep dancing with you, Adolfo, no matter how complicated the steps become. Our first dance as husband and wife was to The Way You Look Tonight, the same song that had played that first night. I was in my white dress, Adolfo in his tuxedo, and for a moment, we could have been any couple celebrating their wedding. Except we weren't. We were a single mother who'd learned to fight for her happiness, and a mafia boss who'd learned that power meant nothing without something worth protecting. Halfway through the dance, Sophie tugged on Adolfo's jacket. Can I dance too? Adolfo lifted her between us, and we swayed together, 3 people who'd become a family in the most unlikely way. Later, after the guests had left and Sophie was asleep in her room, Adolfo and I stood on the estate's balcony, the same balcony where I'd once wondered if loving him would destroy me. Do you regret it? Adolfo asked quietly. Any of it? The danger? The complications? The fact that my world will always have shadows? I thought about the woman I'd been sitting alone at a wedding, invisible and forgotten, drowning in pity in the ruins of her old life. I thought about the woman I'd become, someone who negotiated with mob bosses, who stood her ground in warehouses, who loved fearlessly, despite every reason not to. I regret nothing, I said firmly. Because you were right that first night. About what? I smiled, turning to face him. I do look better on the dance floor with you. In fact, I look better everywhere with you. You make me visible, Adolfo. You make me brave. You make me believe that love can exist even in darkness, maybe especially in darkness. Adolfo kissed me, soft and deep and full of promise. When the night began 2 years ago, Kate Winfrey was just a woman sitting alone at a wedding, drowning in pity and judgment and the ruins of her old life. When it ended, she was the heartbeat of a mafia king who'd once forgotten what it meant to feel alive. But more than that, she was her own person, strong, fearless, loved. And as Adolfo had promised her on that dance floor, pulling her out of invisibility and into his dangerous, beautiful world, she truly did look better in his arms. Not because he saved her, but because together, they saved each other.